Hey guys, today I have two special guests with me, Chris Roper and Dave Carter from the Flowerhill Institute. These two guys share a similar passion that I have, and that is making sure that we get fresh food and access to fresh food in our rural communities, building up our rural communities, and providing access to things like processing meat. Dave and Chris have become experts in their field. What they do is they work with people large and small and setting up meat processing facilities. That could even be something as simple as a van that goes out onto a property or truck and they process right off the back of that truck. They've become experts in understanding the whole grant system, what's available, the loans that are out there, the different types of programs that any farmer could use. In fact, in the video, you'll hear me talk to them a little bit about some of the ideas we have for our farm. What these guys are doing is really, really important because, as you know, during COVID, we lost a lot of access to things like meat. And we've learned through different policies and things that have been going on in the world that we can't continue to rely on a few large corporations that may not even have our back to provide us with the nutrition that we need. It should be coming from our local community. It should be and you know, not just your local community, but within your network community. Maybe that network community is a little broader than just your local base. But you want to bring yourself kind of back to the tradition of supporting farmers that you can trust and knowing that you can get access to healthy foods that don't have a bunch of junk in them. So I think that everybody can get something out of this video because we're going to have a lot of side conversations as we go through some of these things. The Flowerhill Institute in and of itself is an indigenous-led organization, so both Chris and Dave do a lot of work with some of the indigenous communities, but you know, what they'll explain to you is that their work with the Flowerhill isn't just for the indigenous community, it's for everybody. If you're a farmer and you're looking for a way to at least start the processing of an animal on your property so you don't have to wait in line for 6 months at the processing facility, these guys can help you get that type of thing established on your farm. We're also going to discuss just a little bit about the importance of, you know, having access within your communities to fresh foods, fresh vegetables, and what it means to go back to more of a traditional sense of foods. This is all important information. I hope if you guys know any farmers out there or ranchers who have contemplated this, some perfect examples are we did a video about a year ago on Raising Roots Farm, which is in North Carolina. It is a small farm. He has a butcher shop on his property. A lot of this would apply to him. We did a hog killing video, completely got censored by YouTube. They didn't like that one. But where that particular farm is, their next door neighbor during COVID actually built out a cooler facility so that they could harvest their own cows on their property, age them, have time to cut up the meat. And so what these guys can do is help farmers and smaller producers put some of these things together. I met a woman at Farm Aid last year who was it was a young couple, and they had helped them get an entire mini processing facility set up through grants. I mean, just really smart guys, brilliant guys when it comes to pulling this stuff together. And I think that we need to be able to share these tools and get the word out on how to have access to this stuff to really help kind of rebuild our food system and get it out of the mess that it's turned into. And that's what Dave and Chris are committed to doing. So enjoy this video, and I apologize. We will be talking about some grants that the deadline is July 19th. Now, if you never know, depending on what your needs are, you might be able to contact them and still take advantage of those grants. But since I have known Dave and Chris over the years, they constantly are running across different opportunities. And even if there's not a grant opportunity out there for you, their technical assistance program can walk you through even, you know, the lending programs, which, you know, can be very low interest rates for farms, and they'll even, you know, walk you through the entire permitting process, the setup process, the design process. Truly amazing guys. So enjoy the video, and I hope everybody gets something out of it. If you're not concerned about food security today, you think you're missing the ship on a lot of things, because we've seen how fragile the system currently is. And it was actually, I think it was Wheezy Pam when we were interviewing him for the native film, referred to, having control over food within your community as having agency over your own body. But to me, as one of my larger concerns is that the consolidation of the food industry takes away our choice from who we can choose to get it from. And so all of the work that you guys are doing and a lot of the work that we try and do is to help give those choices back to people so they have a choice, to help people become more secure within their communities. And it's also about rebuilding a lot of rural communities. There are a lot of people who move away from rural communities every day because there's just not jobs anymore. There's not a way to make a living in today's standards. So a lot of this work is also bringing back economy to those areas, providing jobs and building communities. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities that come out of these grants and from what everybody's trying to do here.
Absolutely. And, you walk into a major grocery store and there's sort of a fallacy or fantasy of, gosh, look at all of this diversity in here. And, that's coming from a handful of companies, and it's different labels making different claims for a lot of times the same old stuff. We need to do something different. And, we've been telling folks that if you're putting together a project and you're going to do a 1 pound brick of ground beef that's going to go sit in a Kroger or a Walmart next to the 1 pound brick of beef from one of the large packers, that, and all you're doing is competing on price, you're going to have a tough time. But what these rural communities and these smaller producers have is the opportunity. They produce something of quality. They produce something unique. They're doing it regenerative. They're doing bison. They're doing grass fed. They're doing, humane animal care. And those are the types of things we're trying to help them put that so that they can connect with people who value those, those attributes. And then when you talk about bringing back jobs to rural communities, we like to say that you can't just take somebody out of a JBS or a Tyson, processing plant, because in those facilities, they're an assembly line worker. They're standing there doing just one thing all day long. And what we're doing is working with these smaller businesses that are bringing back the butchering, as a skill, as a craft, somebody that can be there in the harvest floor one day, but they can be out behind the retail counter the next day or in the packaging room. And these smaller plants need people to do, accounting and human resources and marketing. And so it's not just people cutting up meat, it's a whole variety of things. And that's why part of the $1 billion commitment that USDA made was to go out to technical schools and community colleges to develop workforce training for meat and poultry processing.
So what you just said, we were down in Texas in the Panhandle last fall, and we went to a small meat packing facility that just opened within the past year. And they were telling us that they were having a hard time hiring people because they couldn't find somebody who was versatile enough on the floor. And they ended up finding a guy who's, their top cutter right now, who is just butchering hogs in his backyard, but he can do it better. He can fit in more places. And so it's also, like you said, it's kind of bringing some skill back into the game, and that helps add to the product that the farmers are making. A lot of people tell me that they complain when I talk about this stuff about how much more expensive it is to buy local or buy from their local farmer. But when you consider how much of those funds are being recycled back into your community and the things that you're protecting with it, is it really that much more expensive? I kind of feel like putting ourselves in the situation we were in when COVID hit was a lot more expensive for everybody.
Yeah, and we have to remember too, Charlie, is Roger mentioned it when you interviewed Roger, but our food is our medicine. And, when we think about the foods that we're buying, the processed foods that we buy that are full of preservatives, or full of gases, they're full of whatever that we don't know. We don't know what they're full of, and you see all kinds of health issues that come from processed foods. And, we all of our communities, we fight diabetes, they fight high blood pressure, they fight heart disease, we fight all kinds of things. If we know where our food comes from, and we know that there's nothing else added to our food besides food, well, is that beef in the package, or is that chemical water? Is it packed with air? Is it some solution? Who knows what they are? But when these foods are grown locally and processed locally, we can control what's put in there, and people can feel better about what they're eating.
So I guess you guys haven't been working on any locally lab grown meat facilities, have you?
I had a very interesting conversation last week. I was at actually a pet food forum. It's a national meeting of people that put together formulas and recipes for pet food companies in Kansas City last week. And during the reception, had an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody who's producing what he called the clean lab grown meat. And and Charlie, you know me well enough that launched me into my sermon on regenerative agriculture and the importance of raising animals to healthy ecosystems there. So we're all about working with folks to bring back the animal agriculture done humanely, done right, and done with respect to the ecosystems that we're in.
Yeah, it really is, I think, a lot more important than people think. And it's unfortunate that there's been so much negative dialogue out there in recent years, when there's a lot of good that comes from, having those animals on the ground. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing the bison documentary right now, is because you look at the bison, and it's, our ecosystem in North America wouldn't exist without it. So, and in some places you can't just bring the bison back. So you've got to have those cows. You've got to have these large ungulates on the land, or we're gonna ruin it.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yep.
With Flower Hill, and this is something that when I talked to Roger Frawa about, there's been a much stronger focus in recent years of indigenous groups on trying to solidify, I guess, their food sovereignty, come up with better ways of feeding their people. And they were kind of onto this before COVID. Now that COVID has hit, I think every community across America is starting to see that we need to have a stronger food system, localized food system.
And the tribes that were looking at food security before COVID were much better prepared to deal with it than the tribes that hadn't focused on it. There were tribes that had been canning. They had canning initiatives and wanted to have canned goods, already stored for their tribe members in case something bad were to happen. And they were able to hand out some of those canned goods. I was working with a tribe in Oklahoma. We already had an animal feeding facility. We had animals on feed. We had a processing plant. We had greenhouses. We had retail outlets that could handle distribution and sales. We had coolers and freezers and trucks. We had logistics taken care of and readily available to us. So we were able to take even food donations from large corporations. If you remember, Charlie, when the restaurant industry shut down, that created a stockpile of food that just immediately stopped being distributed overnight. So when restaurants closed, there was no place for that food to go. You had semi-loads of vegetables, semi-loads of milk, bread, butter, eggs, you name it. It was just backed up everywhere. And these businesses and distributors had to pivot so quick. I mean, we were getting calls overnight of, hey, I've got semi-loads of milk and I want to get it distributed. They were giving it away so it wouldn't spoil. We had semi-loads of vegetables, semi-loads of, you just can't imagine. I received a truckload of jalapeno peppers one time, and I just thought, I don't know how I'm going to get rid of these peppers. Who can eat this many jalapeno peppers? But, we reached out to social media. We received them. We had the coolers to store them. So we took them and we put the word out to area tribes, communities. And we had those peppers gone into homes that people were using within just a couple of days. We did the same things with onions. We actually had live pigs. The Intertribal Ag Council reached out to us at one point when they started euthanizing pigs when the large pork processors were closed down due to COVID. We were able to take thousands of pigs and get them distributed to farmers, tribe members, anyone that remembered the old days that could process a pig in their yard if they had to, were taking these pigs. And we were getting them basically for the cost of transportation, because the farmers up north in Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, they were having to dig holes. They were euthanizing them because there was no place to have them processed. So there's a lot of reasons that these food security concerns are here. There's a lot of reasons that we need to invest in more infrastructure. Our communities need to have logistics. We need to have storage. We need to have coolers, freezers. We need all these things so that we can protect our own community's food security, whether you're a tribe or not. Tribes have to focus heavily, especially the ones that are located in remote areas. When you talk to Roger, I remember, expressed that even from his home in New Mexico, it's 40 miles to the closest grocery store. What do you do when that grocery store has no food? Or, you can't get protein, you can't get vegetables. Who are you going to rely on? So, we preach a lot when we go to conferences. We have to get back to our roots. When we think about our grandparents and and as they lived through the Depression years and how they thought about food, and they grew gardens, they canned, they smoked, they dehydrated, they dried different products out so they knew they would have something in bad times. So we have to get our kids thinking about that, and we have to teach them how to grow and care for the animals, how to finish those animals, how to process those animals, how to grow gardens, what are you going to do when you have that surplus now? Your garden's only going to produce these products for a certain amount of time. How do you eat that product year round? We're going to preserve it some way. We've got to teach these skills that aren't taught anymore, typically in public schools. So those are the things that we all have to think about. And Flowerhill is doing a big part of that, from, outreach, education, STEM camps, gardening camps. A lot of tribes, you see a lot of different initiatives within the tribes to teach a lot of these basic skills. It's not just culture that they're teaching, but it's food preservation, food security, and they want their kids to be taken care of when they pass on. So it's our duty to make sure that our kids can take care of themselves once we're gone, right? So we have to think about this as much more than just meat processing. This is much bigger than just meat processing, but that's our tool to get out. That's a tool that a lot of communities can use to get some facilities put in place. They can do some meat processing in these facilities. They can have cold storage. They can have warehousing. They can have freezers. They can have trucks. They can have these things that can do meat processing, but they can do so much more, right? So we have to help them understand what the capabilities are. And Dave and I aren't the green thumbs to grow, all the plants, but we want to be able to give them the tools. We're not necessarily the ones that are, out there cutting the meat. That neither Dave and I are either one butchers. So, that's one of the first things we tell them. We're not here to teach you how to be a butcher. We want to help you get your facility. We want to help you get your grant. We want to help you get it off the ground, so that you can grow things the way you know how to grow things. You can preserve them the way you know how to preserve them. We're not here to dispute culture or teach culture. but we want them to have the tools that they need to do it at a scale that they can sustain their communities. That's really what this is about. People need to stop relying on the big packers and the big grocery stores and take their food security into their own hands.
But really expose the weakness and the problems that we have in this very centralized system. For years, we've been told that the most efficient way to produce our meat and poultry was to have these large consolidated, processing systems. And Chris is probably tired of me using this analogy, but I like to say I'm a fan of the Wizard of Oz, and COVID was like Toto pulling back the curtain, to expose what was really going on and how weak that system was. But they realized that if they were just going to give grants for folks to build processing facilities, that wasn't going to work. That we really needed to have the ability to work with producers, and particularly producers that have historically been overlooked, to be able to go through the process, find grants, submit grants, build their facilities, but more importantly, build successful businesses. It's about building successful businesses that can sustain rural communities. So to that end, they pulled together a really good network of organizations to provide technical assistance. There is the Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network out of Oregon State University. It's an extension-based program. The Intertribal Agriculture Council that works nationwide with tribes and tribal producers. There's the American Association of Meat Processors, which is the largest association of meat processors, but they don't represent the largest meat processors. They represent everybody else. Then there's the American Meat Science Association and the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute that really help us figure out new ways to market meat or develop different cuts or to utilize the whole carcass. And so it's a pretty comprehensive team, but they realized they needed to have somebody to coordinate that. And so Chris and I were fortunate enough to be asked to come on to help coordinate that. And we had been working through Flowerhill Institute for the last few years. So we went to Flowerhill and asked them if they would be willing to sign on as the organization, and they readily agreed. Flowerhill is a really unique organization. It's based on the Jemez Pueblo in New Mexico. It's indigenous-led. And they really have 4 pillars that they work on: food and agriculture, climate resiliency, cultural preservation, and youth and education. So this really fit within their food and agriculture pillar. And so since last March, when we began this process, the team at Flowerhill, incredible team, not only Roger Frawa, who you've talked with before, Charlie, but the folks behind him and behind Chris and I do a tremendous job, because since we launched last March, we are now up close to 600 requests for technical assistance that we have received all the way from Puerto Rico to the Northern Mariana Islands, in a diversity of projects, all the way from just small projects, maybe a commercial kitchen in a community, to larger commercial, trying to put together branded products. So it's been a challenge, but it's really been exciting over the last year.
So how many of these small facilities have you guys seen expanding over the past couple of years? Because that was one of the biggest problems we had with COVID, is there just wasn't enough capacity really in a lot of the small communities, even our community. You just couldn't get meat unless it was, you were willing to wait. Even now, you still have to wait for about a year to get an appointment with a cow. So how much expansion have you seen, and do you think it's making a difference?
I think it's making a difference.
Yeah, there are facilities that were expanding before these programs hit, but now these programs are offering them a lot of resources to, improve and add on to that. It's hard for us to say, because that first round that Chris mentioned that we weren't really fond of the processing grants, that application went in May. They just started to award those funds, or to award the grants, in December of this last year. So we're really seeing the process just starting right now.
We also saw There were some
Go
programs
ahead.
at AMS though, the MPIRG grants, and the
Yeah.
MPIRG stands for Meat and Poultry Inspection Readiness Grant. And AMS issued even it was after COVID, obviously primarily started, but it was over about a little over a year span that AMS issued almost 370 MPIRG grants to small processors, and those grants were typically around $200,000. So just imagine that impact, Charlie. $200,000 going to these small plants like you're talking about, and what they can do with that. I mean, they can buy coolers, refrigeration, freezers, smokers, roll stock machines. We saw all kinds of upgrades. New saws, new grinders. It allowed them to increase their capacity. And then there were also the state programs that some of the COVID funding got passed down to each state. And states had programs that ranged from $5 million to $25 million. And they were issuing grants to all of their small processors. We saw grants from, $10,000 to, $150,000 that would have went out of those state programs to help small plants as well. So there's been a big impact between the state programs and the AMS programs already. And that was even before last year's MPEP round one. So we're seeing impacts, we're seeing growth. We're seeing communities that care about their food security. They care about where their food comes from. And these small plants are able to handle more capacity. We've seen the lead times go down. Could be for a multitude of reasons, but we saw a lot of small plants that had 2-year backlogs, and we're seeing that getting closer to normal. A lot of those plants are back at 6 months now, maybe, and not a lot different from pre-COVID. But there's still an extremely large demand for local foods and local meat processing. So we're seeing some really positive impacts.
One of the things, when we talk about historically, underserved producers, people think, okay, they're talking about African American and Native American and the like, but veterans are an underserved producer. Women can be. There's a couple of other criteria, but women-owned businesses, beginning farmers and ranchers, limited resource producers, those are all fall into the underserved category. That particularly on this one grant that's out, that can drop that match requirement from 50% to 25%.
Yeah, and I'd like to add for your indigenous tribes that are listening, the Indigenous Animal Grant is for tribal applications. The tribe has to be the applicant. It can't be the tribe member. But if there is a tribe member that's looking to develop or expand meat processing, please reach out to us as well. We want to make sure that we get everyone we can into our system. They can sign up for technical assistance at Flowerhill.Institute. They can click on the MPPTA links and sign up. Send us a technical assistance inquiry, and Dave or I will get right back with them. Dave and I see each and every one of them that come in, and we pride ourselves in making sure we get back with them as fast as possible. If it's not the same day, it's typically by the next morning. In case he and I are traveling, we're always out doing site visits and traveling from one place to the next. But on the tribal applications, there's no match, there's no minimum, and there's no maximum. So they're making those applications fairly broad. The indigenous animals, it can be reindeer, it can be elk, it can be moose, it can be anything that is cultural to that tribe, basically. And seafood,
seals and whales, and
yeah, it's very diverse, and
I thought about this, Chris, after that webinar yesterday. I wished I'd called on Kathleen, who was on from IEC, because before we started, she was talking about how her grandmother, prepared jerky, would cut it really thin and stretch it and put it in the teepee and burn the wood chips. I wish I would have had her explain that on the webinar, because in that grant, they're really focusing on, they call it indigenous, I wrote it down, indigenous inspired design for processing. that it's not just the typical meat processing, and they're not focusing it on that you have to have a marketable product.
Yeah.
It's you do it culturally appropriate and you feed your community.
Yeah, yeah. We had a lot of listeners on from Alaska, and a lot of different cultures there in Alaska as far as the products and proteins that they live on and what they were raised on. So these grants are flexible to really fit the tribes in all different regions. So each tribe, they may have cultures of dehydrating, smoking. Some of them freeze dry. So there's a lot of different things that are applicable out there. And again, we want, if they have questions, we want them to reach out, and we want to work with them and try to help them any way we can.
To make sure I'm understanding this correctly, with that particular grant, you don't have to have something marketable under USDA inspection. It could just be building a facility for your tribe to do it the way you want to do it, right?
So if they're doing non-amenable species, bison, elk, reindeer, and the like, you're right, they don't have to. Now, what's interesting in the grant is you get bonus points on the grant if you're processing those indigenous or non-amenable species and a variety of them. It doesn't prohibit you from processing beef or pork, whatever. If you do that, though, you do have to follow the federal food safety and be under inspection.
We try to help them walk through that process, Charlie, and understand. We want to know where the product's going to end up. That's one of the very first questions we ask is, what are you doing with the product and where's it going? Because that can dictate how it's processed, how it's harvested, if there's inspection required, all those kind of things, all the way down to packaging and labeling. All of those things can require equipment, space, inspection, all kinds of things. So we really have to dive in with each and every tribe and each and every technical assistance inquiry we get, so that we can make sure we answer those questions right, know what their business is, and if they are just feeding their people. It can be as simple or as complex, depending on what their goals are.
Now, there are 2 grants that are on the table right now. One of them is more widespread applicable, is that local meat processing. But then there's also one that's just targeted to tribes, which is a pretty unique and pretty much out of the box for anything that USDA's done. And then we're waiting for the next grant to come out that will actually fund construction projects. So
yeah, and there's been 2 webinars this week, Charlie. Dave primarily did one on the MCAP equipment only and existing processing facility grant. He did that one on Monday. And then yesterday did one on the indigenous animals grant that is only available to tribes. So there's a couple of unique things about these grants this year that they're not anything like the ones last year. There's an equipment only grant that goes up to $250,000 with no match for existing processors. And then the existing facility expansion grant can go up to $5 million with a 50% match unless they are an underserved producer. And then the match gets reduced to 25%. So these opportunities are unique. I literally just got off the phone with a processor that had applied for an MPEP grant last year for a $9 million total construction cost. But MPEP round 1 was only going to cover 20% of the total construction cost of a project. So he would have only gotten $2 million. And so under this program, he can go up to $5 million with a 25% match because they're an underserved producer. He can actually get more money through this funding opportunity than he was going to be able to get last year on last year's opportunity. So for certain processors that fit this program, it's a really, really good opportunity. But these particular, the MCAP grant is for existing facilities only. These funding opportunities today are not covering new construction of new meat processing plants, but we are expecting another grant opportunity to open through rural development that will cover new construction. So there's some unique things happening. We're trying to reach as many people as we can to let them know these grants will close July 19th. And then again, as we have new ones, we'll focus our outreach on the new ones once we know what those are. But there are some really unique opportunities. Dave and I were working with, or we have worked with around 600 processors so far, all across the country, including Puerto Rico. We had another call today with the groups in Puerto Rico. We're getting ready to go back there June 19th. So there's a lot of opportunities in areas that are typically forgotten. We spend a lot of time focused on underserved communities. We focus on the out of the way places like you do. When you're out filming and looking, you're trying to bring awareness to folks that don't typically get awareness, and we try to go out to people and find them. And in a lot of cases, the folks that don't get the email alerts when these grants open, and they don't get notified. Nobody's beating on their door to say, "Hey, here's an opportunity," you qualify for it. So let's talk about how this can help you, or help your business, or help your community. And these opportunities really can help communities in a big picture. So that's what we're trying to do. Dave and I are passionate about that, and it really is transformational for food systems for rural communities. Dave and I make a lot of trips, a lot of site visits, a lot of ranch visits. There's a lot of people doing some wonderful things and developing food hubs, community kitchens, small meat processing, added value processing. It's all a benefit compared to where we were, when COVID hit. And, that COVID has really woke a lot of people up. They want to know where their food comes from, and they want to know how they're going to feed their family when the next issue arises. So it's a big deal. So we want to make sure that we can get out to as many people as possible.
When you talk about these grants, now, how you guys help with technical assistance, correct? So would you be able to help guide people through the process of getting the grants?
That's exactly what we're here for, Charlie, is sort of and I was just up meeting with a guy not too far away, so I drove up and met with him today. But, and I mentioned, we're here to help the folks that have never applied for grants, or they've started to apply for a grant in the past and they just got frustrated by, getting set up in the system, or, just didn't think. And that's why they really set us up, is that they wanted to make sure we're reaching out to folks that have been overlooked in the past, and be able to help them through the process. So it's not just finding the grants and helping them write the grants, but, Chris has got the background in construction. So when it comes to designing a plant or a floor plan, the expertise there, or if they want to put together sort of a marketing plan and thing, I can step in on some things. So it's really designed to work with them all the way. It's not just a one and done thing. It's long-term assistance.
Yeah, Chris, I heard you opened a facility in record time in Osage Nation down there.
Yeah, that one went really fast. We did that one in about 7 months. So yeah, Dave worked on that one as well. It was the team we have at Flowerhill was instrumental in putting that together and seeing it through, as well as the follow-up in operations. We still have calls with those groups today. We don't want to just get a facility built and leave them and go on down the road. We have long-lasting relationships with these folks, and we know that they're trying to feed their people. And if they have a problem, we want them to call us. Hey, this quit working, or this is not working, or maybe they're losing money. Well, hey, help me figure out why I'm losing money. Why is my operational cost more than my overall cost? Why does this keep rising? Or, we want to be there to help them through all those issues.
Now, when you're doing these grants, and we talk about, the cost of, millions of dollars that it would take to put into a facility. But when we were at the the concert here in Raleigh a while back, you had introduced me to somebody who was doing a much smaller facility. So what is the scale of which you're able to work with to help people get grants to do these facilities? Obviously, the grants that you just mentioned are for existing facilities expanding, but there may be opportunities for new.
Yeah. And it really is all over the range. I mean, let's put it this way. We don't work with JBS, Tyson, or Smithfield. But about everybody else, we've been involved with. And Chris mentioned, some of them are building glorified community kitchens with just, a rail in there and a grinder and, some packaging equipment for folks to bring in their own animals and process them. And rather than doing it in the barn, do it in a nice area. And then others are looking at this group in Puerto Rico that we're working with is about 70 hog producers that right now do whole pigs for restaurants along what they call the pork highway in Puerto Rico. And they want to expand and be able to do, fresh pork for grocery stores there, because Puerto Rico's agriculture has just been decimated, not just by hurricanes, but for a number of reasons. And so they're just really trying to rebuild the agricultural economy there.
I like to say we're here for the underdog. We're rooting for the underdog, and we want to help give them the tools they need to be successful. So, it can be an Indian tribe. We work with over 60 Indian tribes. There were about 90 different people that were on our Indigenous Animals Grant webinar yesterday. So, and that included groups from Alaska, Hawaii, and all over the lower 48. So, I just got off the phone with another group in Montana. I had another call today in Puerto Rico, another one in North Carolina with some small farmers with, again, Dave mentioned scales all over the board. It can be a 2,000 square foot facility that just wants to process and feed their community, or it can be a 20, 30,000 square foot facility that wants to supply statewide or in multiple states. We work with a lot of different groups, just not the big packers. The big packers don't need us to help them. And we're trying to, shore up those supplies in those local communities. And that's really where we focus at.
We have a person that we've been talking to because we have some longhorns and our local facilities won't take the longhorns. But this is I think they're either custom or state licensed right now. And they're working on expanding all of that, but they lease some facilities. And one of their strategies that they had talked to us about was if we set up a small facility on site, and I guess this would probably be under custom butcher because you'd have to have an inspector out there for the kill, but they could kill it and use that facility to do some of their initial butchering and things like that. Would that type of scenario qualify for anything of these type of grants, especially if you built something more kind of like a regional hub? So because this guy travels around, he has one of those, mobile setups.
Yeah, no, and you can do that. I mean, if you're doing it, longhorns being an amenable species, if you're going to sell that meat commercially, you'd have to have a setup with some pins and some things like that so the inspector can look at them and the like. With bison, or if you're doing something that's a non-amenable, it's a little looser. But I was just down Wednesday, in Taos, and met with the Pueblo there, as well as the Taos Economic Development Commission, and they're getting it refurbished, but they call it the Mobile Matanza, which is a mobile slaughter plant. And then they have they built a really nice sort of a food processing system there at the Pueblo, so they can back that mobile Matanza up to it and just take the carcasses, off the truck and into their cooler there and process them from there.
Just for your information, also, a couple things. You can look at on-farm storage facilities. There's a farm storage facility loan program with Farm Service Agency that would at least loan money for on-farm coolers, on-farm freezers, if you were going to build a barn, storage, trucks, refrigerated trucks, if you were going to have on-farm production of products similar to what you mentioned, you could seek some funding from Farm Service Agency to start up something small like that. It would not fit into either of the grants that are open right now, whether it's the MCAP or IAG. But that's not to say you couldn't do something for your farm to benefit, because you can do on-farm sales and sell halves and wholes as well and fall under custom processing. But on the same token, North Carolina has a Talmadge Aiken program that works in conjunction with FSIS. So you can do Talmadge Aiken inspection in North Carolina with your state inspectors, and that you can have that federal bug as well and ship across state lines. So there's a few options in North Carolina specifically.
How difficult is it to go through the process of applying for the grants?
It varies a little bit, because Chris mentioned that there's the two ones under the MCAP. There's the one that's just for buying a couple of pieces of equipment. That's got a simplified, application. And then there's the other one that's more extensive. But yeah, what we try and do is work with folks. And if you're going to do any of these grants, you got to get into the system. So you have to get set up with a SAMS number and a unique identifier number and that. And so at this point in the process, we're just pushing everybody to make sure they do that early on, because then it makes the rest of it easier. And then, with the grants, it differs, but generally they have templates on there that you fill in your narrative and what you're trying to do, and you attach your letters of support. But there's always then they have SF 245 forms or, whatever that you have to fill out. And again, we can kind of coach. We can't do it for them, but we just kind of coach them through the process so they just don't get intimidated and walk away from it.
Yeah, and these grants are through AMS, the Agricultural Marketing Service. They're definitely simpler than the program that was out last year. So the application processes, again, vary by grant and which agency is administering that grant, but also the complexity. If it has new construction involved in some grants, you could have different requirements for new construction. These don't allow new construction per se, so that eliminates some of the special construction requirements that you might see in other grants. So these are not too bad to deal with. We can help people walk through the application process. We have some specialists on staff that can help with, SAM.gov and grants.gov and making sure they get their initial numbers or usernames and passwords. That's, basic step one. And we have to get them past that before they can actually apply for a grant. But we have people that can help with all that.
And how are the grants administered once they come out? Just for those who've never gotten a grant before, you have a project budget of $2 million and you get a grant for 50%. So, you're figuring in $1 million, is it paid out as it's matched, or is it paid out all at once? And then how does that process work?
Generally, you have periods. You can do it on a quarterly basis or whatever. You spend the money first and then you get reimbursed. And so you have to fill in and say, this period that we spent X amount and here's the receipts for it. And put that in and they process it and then reimburse you on that. You have to do some reporting, make sure we spent the money on the things we got the grant for. So it varies again by grant, but it's, the thing that we caution people on, and particularly on these grants or for equipment, is you don't apply for the grant, then go buy the equipment, then get the grant and get the check. Or you don't apply for the grant, get a check and buy the equipment. You apply for the grant, find out if you got the grant, get approved for that, go buy the equipment, and then you get reimbursed.
Yeah, you can submit draws. You don't have you wouldn't necessarily get a check for all $1 million at one time. Say if you got a contract on that piece of equipment, it costs $200,000. You submit that for a draw request, and you draw that funding down.
Gotcha. So it's pretty much kind of like having a house construction loan.
Kind of, yeah.
Well, how do people get in touch with you guys?
So the main way, first of all, you can go on to usda.gov/meet, and there's a lot of information on there about the different grant programs, but there's then also a link to sign up for technical assistance, and that kind of takes them over to our website. Or if you want to go directly, you go to flowerhill.institute. And that is the website for Flower Hill, and there's a special section there for technical assistance. And we just encourage people to submit a request. And it's very simple. You go online, it's a form, takes less than 5 minutes. You tell us who you are, where you are, what you're doing, what you want to do, what resources you might be looking for. And as Chris said, we look at every one of those when they come in. And generally, what we'll do is we'll circle back and say, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're looking for here? Give us a little bit more information. Or a lot of times people are just saying, I'm looking for the request for assistance on this grant. We'll send them, that. But a lot of times then we set up a Zoom meeting with them to talk about their project and what kind of assistance. And then the ultimate goal is to hook them up with the best technical assistance that, that we have within our network. If they're going through the regulatory process and putting together their HACCP plan, the American Association of Meat Processors has got a wealth of resources to help you out on that. If Indigenous Project, the Intertribal Ag Council. And so we just try and make sure that we're getting them the best technical assistance. But it all starts with just filling out that form.